Salam alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. This is Al-Aqsa Mosque. The Jerusalem landmark is known as Al-Haram Sharif, or the Noble Sanctuary by Muslims, and as a temple mount by Jews. Spanning 35 acres, it's situated in the Old City, and it's significant to all three Abrahamic religions. But it's also one of the world's most contested territories following the declaration of Israel in 1948, which uprooted and expelled 750,000 Palestinians. East Jerusalem, including the Old City and Al-Aqsa Mosque, came under Jordanian control. But after the 1967 war, Israel occupied East Jerusalem in violation of international law, and since then, Al-Aqsa Mosque has become a flashpoint and a symbol of Palestinian resistance. Now, over the years, Jordan's authority over the site has weakened, while Israeli incursions and restrictions have increased and become more violent. Today, as the Israeli war in Gaza rages, Al-Aqsa sees near daily settler incursions, raids, and attacks on Palestinian worshippers. Many Palestinians fear the slow, deliberate erosion of their presence and worry that losing access to Al-Aqsa could be a precursor to losing their land altogether. So what is the history of Allah, and how has the status quo changed? Music, the idea of a status quo in Jerusalem, goes back to an 1852 Ottoman edict that froze control over Christian holy sites, particularly the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, between various religious communities, and forbid any construction or alterations to their existing status. Reaffirmed by later treaties, it created rigid rules about who could do what, down to fixing doors or lighting candles. And over time, this status quo became a model for managing other religious sites in Jerusalem, including Al-Aqsa Mosque in 1967. Now, after the First Arab-Israeli War broke out in 1948, Israel captured 78% of historic Palestine. East Jerusalem, where Al-Aqsa Mosque is situated, fell under the custodianship of the Hashite Kingdom of Jordan. But Israel's encroachment intensified in 1967. And after the Six-Day War, Israel illegally annexed the Old City and Al-Aqsa, violating international law. Following the war, Jordan and Israel agreed that the Waqf Islamic Trust would control affairs inside the mosque, while Israel controlled external security and overall sovereignty. This status quo stipulated that only Muslim worshippers were permitted to visit the site, whilst non-Muslims were allowed with permission from the Islamic Waqf during set hours, but were not permitted to pray there. On the southwestern fringe of Al-Aqsa Mosque lies the Western Wall, also known to Jews as the Wailing Wall. For Jews, the wall is believed to be the last remaining remnant of the Second Jewish Temple, destroyed by the Romans in 70 CE, and is considered the holiest site where Jews can pray. It's administered by Israel's Ministry of Religious Services and the Western Wall Heritage Foundation, and operates under Orthodox Jewish rules, which includes gender segregation during prayer. While non-Jewish visitors are allowed to enter the area, they are not permitted to perform any non-Jewish religious rituals in line with the status quo arrangements governing the site. But an extremist Messianic Jewish movement known as the Temple Mount movement, a belief that a third temple must be built in the compound destroying Al-Aqsa Mosque, has undermined the status quo. Extremist settler groups believe that the third temple will fulfill a biblical prophecy and restore Jewish sovereignty over the site. Some of these groups are now openly rehearsing rituals linked to temple construction. In 2024, members of the Temple Institute stage a symbolic practice of the red hare sacrifice, a ritual believed by some to be necessary for building a third temple on the very site where Allah and the Dome of the Rock now stand. Despite the agreement between Jordan and Israel, settler groups raid the mosque without Palestinian permission and carry out excavations in the area. In 1990, right-wing Jewish settler group known as Temple Mount Faithful attempted to lay a cornerstone, the symbolic first stone of construction for the third temple in the compound. For many Palestinians and Muslims, the provocative act was seen as a direct threat to the mosque's existence, an attempt to replace it. This triggered a protest in which Israeli forces killed 21 Palestinians. On September 28, 2000, Israeli opposition leader Ariel Sharon visited Al-Haram Sharif, or Temple Mount, surrounded by Israeli guards and police, sparking off clashes which would result in the Second Intifada. Once considered to be on the fringes of Israeli society, the Temple movement has grown rapidly and has become increasingly mainstream. When Sharon became prime minister a year later as the head of the Liquid Party, his government oversaw the construction of a vast separation wall, effectively cutting off Palestinian access to East Jerusalem and Al-Aqsa from much of the occupied West Bank. What was once a place of regular pilgrimage for Muslims from across Palestine became increasingly inaccessible, with entry limited by age, permits, and humiliating checkpoint procedures. Music in recent years, settler incursions into the compound, often under armed police protection, have increased dramatically. Organized tours by Jewish groups now occur almost daily, facilitated by Israeli authorities. Far-right Israeli politicians now make high-profile visits. In January 2023, far-right National Security Minister Ben-Gvir, a settler advocate, visited the site. In 2024, he went further, publicly calling for the construction of a Jewish synagogue at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. At the same time, radical Temple Mount activists have accelerated preparations for the construction of a third temple, a goal that would require the removal of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Part of this vision is the ritual of the red heifer, a rare purification ceremony outlined in Jewish scripture which calls for the sacrifice of a flawless red deer on Jerusalem's Mount of Olives, to pave way for the construction of the third temple. In 2022, 5 Texan red deers were flown to Israel, and in 2024, an ultra-nationalist group were pictured practicing the ritual with a cutout of a red deer. At Al-Aqsa, tensions tend to escalate during Ramadan when Israeli authorities place restrictions on Palestinian worshippers who want to pray at the site. In 2021, 2022, and 2023, Israeli police raided the mosque compound during prayers, firing tear gas, stun grenades, and rubber bullets. Worshippers, including women and children, were forcibly cleared from the mosque. Compounding tensions turn internationalist events like the Jerusalem Flag March. This is an annual state-sponsored Israeli celebration of the 1967 occupation of East Jerusalem. The march draws thousands of Israelis, including Farite ministers, and winds through the heavily populated Muslim quarter. While it doesn't formally include the Al-Aqsa compound, the event is often preceded by a campaign of violence in the LD city that shuts down Palestinian-majority areas, with participants frequently chanting slogans like "Death to Arabs," "Gaza is ours," and "May their villages burn." Young Israeli men have been seen harassing Palestine residents, spitting at women in hijabs, ransacking shops, and even forcing their way into homes. Judicial decisions have also played a role in shifting the status quo. In recent years, Israeli courts have issued rulings legitimizing silent Jewish prayer in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, a practice once considered a clear violation of long-standing agreements. At the same time, Jordan's authority, represented by the Islamic Waqf, has repeatedly been undermined. Work officials have been blocked from enforcing regulations inside the compound, and in 2023, even the Jordanian ambassador was denied entry. This was widely condemned as a direct defiance of Jordan's custodianship. Increasingly, Israeli police have bypassed or overridden work directives, asserting de facto control over internal affairs at the site. Now, Jordan continues to issue strong statements condemning Israeli incursions and violations. Its Ministry of Foreign Affairs has called settle invasions provocative and unacceptable, warning that these violations could lead to uncontrollable escalation. Jordan maintains that the Al-Aqsa Mosque is an exclusive Muslim place of worship and that the Jerusalem Waqf is the sole legitimate authority. But more and more, these declarations are viewed as symbolic. Israel's actions, like denying access to Jordanian diplomats or ignoring work oversight, expose the limits of Jordanian influence. Without enforcement power or international backing, Jordan's custodianship appears more ceremonial than practical music for many Palestinians. What's happening at Al-Aqsa mirrors the trajectory of the Ibrahim Mosque in Hebron. after a Jewish settler killed 29 Muslim worshippers there in 1994. Israeli authorities split the mosque between Jewish and Muslim worshippers, eventually giving 60% of the site to settlers. Over time, Palestinians in Hebron have faced increasing isolation, movement restriction, and settler violence. In 2025, Israel transferred administrative control over parts of the Ibrahim Mosque compound from the Palestinian-run municipality to the Religious Council of the local Israeli settlement, a further erosion of Palestinian sovereignty. Now, Palestinians see similar patterns emerging at Al-Aqsa through settler incursions, reduced access, court rulings, police raids, and the steady erosion of work for authority. Today, whilst Israel's war on Gaza intensifies, killing over 62,000 Palestinians, Al-Aqsa remains a site of near-daily confrontations. Jordan, once a central actor in maintaining Al-Aqsa status quo, now finds its custodianship reduced to a largely symbolic role, issuing condemnations but unable to enforce red lines. The shift in power on the ground reflects not just Jordan's diminished influence in Al-Aqsa, but how far the status quo itself has unra. Philid, few places on earth hold as much layered spiritual meaning as the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, known in Arabic as Al-Haram al-Sharif, the noble sanctuary, and in Jewish tradition as the Temple Mount. The 37-acre hilltop in the Old City of Jerusalem has been revered for over 3 millennia, serving as a central focus of worship, pilgrimage, and identity for the 3 Abrahamic faiths in Islam. For Muslims, Al-Aqsa is the 3rd holiest site after Mecca and Medina. The Quran Surah Al-Isra 17:1 describes the Isra and Miraj, the miraculous night journey in which the Prophet Muhammad was taken from the sacred mosque to the farthest mosque. Centuries of Islamic scholarship identify this farthest mosque with Al-Aqsa. Tradition says that from this very spot the Prophet ascended to the heavens, leading the earlier prophets in prayer. Early Muslims faced Jerusalem as their first Qibla direction of prayer before it was changed to Mecca, binding the site permanently to Ayla. Mike, spiritual memory. Under the early Umayyad caliphs, the Dome of the Rock 691 CE and the Al-Aqsa Mosque 705 CE were built, making the Haram al-Sharif not only a place of worship, but a statement of the Islamic world's architectural and theological vision in Judaism. For Jews, the same plateau is the location of the first and second temples, the most sacred structures in Jewish history. The first temple built by King Solomon in the 10th century BCE and the second temple, rebuilt after the Babylonian exile and later expanded by Herod the Great, were considered the earthly dwelling place of the divine presence, Shekinah. Their destruction, first by the Babylonians 586 BCE and then by the Romans 70 CE, became defining national tragedies, mourned annually on Tisha B'Av. The remaining western retaining wall of the complex, known as the Western Wall or Kotel, is today the most sacred accessible site for Jewish prayer. Because of the holiness of the inner area where the temple's on, CE stood, most rabbinical authorities discouraged Jews from entering the mount itself in Christianity. Christian reverence for Jerusalem centers mainly on the life, crucifixion, and resurrection of Jesus, events that occurred nearby. Yet the Temple Mount is also central to Christian scripture. Jesus was presented there as an infant, taught within its courts, and predicted its destruction. For many Christians, the site symbolizes both the continuity of biblical prophecy and the transition from the old covenant of temple sacrifice to the new covenant of spiritual worship. In early Christian centuries, the mount lay in ruins, yet its memory endured in pilgrim literature as a testament to divine history and redemption, shared and contested holiness. Across all 3 traditions, the plateau is a meeting point of heaven and earth, a symbol of divine revelation and a physical link between sacred narratives. Each community's connection is ancient and deeply emotional. This shared sanctity, LSO explains why the site is so sensitive. Prayer, access, and control touch the heart of religious identity for billions worldwide. The modern status quo arrangements, maintaining existing rights of worship and administration, exists precisely to protect this multi-layered holiness while preventing new claims that could spark conflict. In modern times, Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Temple Mount Haram al-Sharif remain among the most sensitive and contested pieces of land on earth. Beneath its stone courtyards lies a story not only of faith, but of power, politics, and identity, where centuries of devotion collide with the realities of a divided city, the status quo framework. The current system, known as the status quo, is a centuries-old arrangement designed to preserve existing religious rights and prevent unilateral change. It traces its roots to the Ottoman Empire, when Sultan Abdul-Majid I in 1852 formally recognized which communities controlled which holy places in Jerusalem. Under this principle, each faith could maintain its own rituals and spaces, but none could alter the pattern of worship without consensus. After 1948, East Jerusalem, including Al-Aqsa, came under Jordanian rule. The Islamic Waqf, a religious trust administered by Jordan, became and remains the official custodian of the compound's day-to-day affairs. It oversees prayer schedules, maintenance, and religious education. This continuity of Muslim custodianship has been central to maintaining the status quo from the Islamic world's perspective. Post-1967 changes. The most dramatic turning point came after the Six-Day War of 1967, when Israel captured East Jerusalem from Jordan. Despite the political shift, Israeli leaders, most notably Defense Minister Moshe Dayan, agreed to leave the Islamic Waqf in charge of the internal administration of the Haram al-Sharif. This decision preserved the religious balance. Muslims continue to worship inside the compound, especially at the Al-Aqsa Mosque and Dome. Of the Rock, non-Muslims, including Jews and Christians, may visit during specific hours but may not perform public prayers there. The mount itself thus operates under a dual reality. Israel maintains overall security and external control, while the Jordanian Waqf retains religious authority inside. This delicate arrangement reflects a pragmatic coexistence rather than a resolved sovereignty, legal and political dimensions. Israel annexed East Jerusalem in 1980 and declared the city its eternal and indivisible capital, a move not recognized by most of the international community. The United Nations and many states regard East Jerusalem, including Al-Aqsa, as occupied territory subject to international law and UN resolutions affirming freedom of worship and preservation of existing arrangements. Jordan's custodianship was reaffirmed in several peace understandings, most notably the 1994 Israel-Jordan Peace Treaty, which recognized Amman's special role in Islamic holy sites in Jerusalem. The Palestinian Authority also acknowledges Jordan's role in coordination with the Waqf, yet the question of sovereignty remains unresolved. Palestinians view the compound as an inseparable part of a future Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital. Many Israelis, particularly religious nationalists, see it as the historic heart of ancient Judaism and therefore integral to Israeli identity. Recurring tensions. Because of this overlap of faith and national symbolism, even small administrative or security changes often spark major unrest. Restrictions on Muslim worshippers, visits by Israeli politicians, or archaeological excavations near the compound have repeatedly triggered waves of violence across Jerusalem and beyond. Each side interprets such incidents through the lens of historical memory. Muslims fear encroachment on their holy place, while Jews resent limits on access to what they regard as their holiest site. Social media now magnifies every confrontat, transforming local disputes into global reactions. The compound thus acts as a barometer for the entire Israeli-Palestinian conflict. When calm prevails at Al-Aqsa, it often signals a fragile stability. When clashes erupt, they reverberate across the region, the symbol of Jerusalem today. For over a century, control of Al-Aqsa has symbolized more than ownership of land. It represents legitimacy, identity, and spiritual destiny. Leaders magnifies every confrontat, transforming local disputes into global reactions. The compound thus acts as a barometer for the entire Israeli-Palestinian conflict. When calm prevails at Al-Aqsa, it often signals a fragile stability. When clashes erupt, they reverberate across the region, the symbol of Jerusalem today. For over a century, control of Al-Aqsa has symbolized more than ownership of land. It represents legitimacy, identity, and spiritual destiny. Leaders on all sides invoke it to rally emotion or justify policy, while millions of believers see it as sacred space that must be protected from political manipulation. The challenge ahead is whether humanity can preserve the holiness of this place above the noise of rivalry. The status quo is not perfect, but it remains the fragile bridge between three faiths and two nations, a living reminder that in Jerusalem, peace is not built by walls of stone, but by restraint, respect, and remembrance. The conflict over Al-Aqsa is not contained by the stone wall, of Jerusalem. It extends into the halls of international law, the language of diplomacy, and the conscience of nations. For decades, the status of this sacred plateau has stood at the crossroads of faith and foreign policy, forcing governments and organizations to walk the thinnest line between recognition and reverence, the foundation of international law. Under international law, East Jerusalem, including the Al-Aqsa compound, is considered occupied territory following Israel's 1967 capture of the area from Jordan. The Fourth Geneva Convention prohibits permanent alteration of occupied land and calls for protection of religious sites. The United Nations Security Council, through resolutions such as 242/1967 and 478/1980, declared that the annexation of East Jerusalem had no legal validity and called for respect of all faiths' access to their holy places. Yet, despite repeated international reaffirmations, realities on the ground continue to evolve. Each stone restored, EAC fence erected, each patrol repositioned, raises legal and moral questions about sovereignty, custodianship, and human rights, UNESCO and cultural heritage protection. The United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, recognizes the Old City of Jerusalem and its walls, including the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, as a World Heritage Site of outstanding universal value. This designation emphasizes the duty of all nations to protect the site's cultural, historical, and religious integrity. However, UNESCO has often been drawn into controversy. Different resolutions referring to the site by varying names have been interpreted by one side or another as political statements. Such debates illustrate the difficulty of using technical heritage language to describe a place that is both monument and symbol, stone and spirit. The role of Jordan and the Islamic world. Jordan remains the recognized custodian of Islamic and Christian holy sites in Jerusalem. A role supported by the 1994 Israel-Jordan Peace Treaty by the Arab League. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation, OIC, frequently issues communiques reaffirming that Al-Aqsa is a sacred trust, waqf, for the entire Muslim world. Any alteration in its administration or access is therefore viewed not as a local matter, but as a pan-Islamic concern, prompting responses from capitals stretching from Rabat to Jakarta. In recent years, diplomatic mediation by Jordan, Egypt, and the United States has repeatedly helped diffuse crises, showing that even the smallest incidents at Al-Aqsa can carry global repercussions. A temporary restriction on worshippers can become a headline in every Arabic language channel. A political visit can trigger protests on multiple continents. Western and European positions. Most Western and European governments maintain a balanced but cautious stance, supporting the principle of the status quo and the protection of freedom of worship. The European Union and the United States periodically express concern over unilateral actions, whether building restrictions, archaeological works, or limitations on prayer that could destabilize the arrangement. While the U.S. recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital in 2017, it simultaneously emphasized that questions of sovereignty over specific holy sites must be resolved through negotiations and mutual respect for existing agreements. In practice, this means continuing to support Jordan's custodial role and discouraging measures that alter the delicate balance of access international peace efforts. Every major peace proposal, from the Camp David Accords to the Oslo process, the Arab Peace Initiative, and later UN-backed frameworks, has wrestled with the issue of Jerusalem and the sanctity of Al-Aqsa. Diplomats understand that without a consensus on this hilltop, no lasting peace in the region can stand. The challenge is defining sovereignty in a space that, for billions, already belongs to heaven. The prevailing diplomatic goal is preservation over transformation, maintaining calm, ensuring access, and preventing provocations that can ignite broader violence. Yet peace remains fragile because emotion outweighs legal text. Treaties cannot fully contain centuries of faith and memory, a global symbol beyond politics. Today, the image of Al-Aqsa resonates far beyond the Middle East. For Muslims, it is a spiritual compass pointing toward collective identity. For Jews, it is the memory of ancient worship. For Christians, a reminder of prophecy and redemption. For the international community, it is a test of our ability to protect pluralism itself. In a world often divided by ideology and power, this sacred space continues to challenge humanity with a simple question: can law and diplomacy protect what is holy to all? The future of the status quo, and perhaps of Jerusalem's peace, depends on that answer. As the sun rises over Jerusalem, the golden light glinting off the dome of the rock reflects both the beauty and fragility of one of humanity's most sacred spaces. The future of the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, or the Temple Mount as it is also known, is not just a question of politics or faith. It is a test of humanity's capacity to coexist with its own diversity. The status quo that has endured for centuries is being strained by modern realities, demographic change, and competing visions of sovereignty. The fragile balance of the status quo. For now, the status quo endures, not because it satisfies all parties, but because it prevents greater chaos. It is an unspoken understanding. Muslims pray inside, non-Muslims visit without public worship, Israel maintains external security, and Jordan's Waqf administers religious affairs. It is a structure built not on agreement, but on restraint. Yet restraint has its limits. As political pressures intensify, each side faces movements within its society calling for more control, more presence, more assertion of identity. Religious activists, nationalist groups, and even social media influencers have turned the sacred plateau into a global stage. Every act of defiance, a flag raised, a prayer whispered, can ignite tension far beyond Jerusalem's walls. Demographic and political pressures. Jerusalem's population is growing and diversifying, with each community feeling more squeezed within limited space. Israeli policies of settlement and urban expansion alter the geography and demographics of East Jerusalem, while Palestinian residents struggle with mobility, permits, and political representation. These realities, layered atop religious sensitivity, create a pressure cooker in which a small spark can trigger disproportionate unrest. At the same time, regional politics influence the site. Shifting alliances between Israel and Arab states, such as the Abraham Accords, have created new dynamics. Some see these agreements as opportunities for dialogue. Others fear they marginalize the Pales Palestinian issue and weaken Jordan's custodianship. The result is a growing uncertainty. Will the traditional balance hold, or will new power structures emerge? The role of faith leaders. Amid these tensions, a quieter effort continues, one not waged by politicians, but by faith leaders. Muslim imams, Jewish rabbis, and Christian clergy who share a belief in the sanctity of life are slowly building channels of interfaith respect. They meet, often in private, to reaffirm that holiness must never be used as a weapon. Initiatives like these reflect the deeper truth that the status quo can survive only if trust exists between communities. Without moral leadership, treaties and security forces cannot maintain peace. Al-Aqsa's future may depend less on politics and more on the courage of those who preach compassion over control, international and technological influences. In a connected world, what happens in Jerusalem no longer stays there. Every confrontation is broadcast instantly, sharpened. Narratives worldwide. Governments, NGOs, and online platforms now play unexpected roles in the site's stability. Artificial intelligence monitors unrest, satellite imagery tracks construction, and global news cycles amplify emotion faster than diplomacy can respond. Yet technology also offers hope. Virtual tourism, interfaith education, and digital heritage preservation projects allow people of all faiths to experience the site's beauty without physical conflict. When the world learns rather than reacts, the holy city becomes a classroom, not a battlefield, paths toward a shared future. The path forward begins not with dominance but with understanding. Real peace will require respect for existing custodianships, ensuring the Waqf's authority remains intact and recognized, freedom of worship guaranteed for all faiths under international oversight, urban equity, allowing Palestinian and Israeli residents to coexist in dignity and security, educational and cultural exchange. Prague, Rams, promoting knowledge of the site's shared heritage rather than competing claims, consistent international mediation, not just in times of crisis, but as a permanent mechanism of dialogue. Peace is not born in treaties alone. It begins when people see their sacred story reflected in another's eyes. Al-Aqsa, after all, means the farthest, yet its message draws humanity closer to truth, to humility, and to the awareness that no single hand can hold what belongs to all, the moral responsibility of the present. We inherit this moment from generations who prayed, fought, and dreamed over the same stones. Our task is to protect the sanctity they cherished, not through domination but through wisdom. The future of Al-Aqsa will depend on whether leaders, believers, and nations can recognize that holiness is not possession, it is presence. If the world can preserve this fragile plateau with justice, empathy, and restraint, it will not only save a mosque or a wall, it will safeguard the idea that faith can still unite what politics divides. There are places in this world where history refuses to sleep, where every stone carries memory, every shadow carries prayer, and every dawn whispers a story older than empires. Among them, Al-Aqsa stands as one of humanity's most sacred mirrors, reflecting not only our faiths, but our flaws, our longing for connection, and our eternal search for peace, the timeless heart of faith. For more than 3,000 years, people have walked this hilltop seeking the same thing, closeness to the divine. Prophets once bowed here, kings built and lost their temples here, and generations came to weep, to hope, and to heal. Whether it was called Mount Moriah, Temple Mount, or Haram al-Sharif, its message has always been the same, that heaven once touched the earth, and that we as children of Adam are still reaching upward through centuries of conquest and coexistence. The stones of Al-Aqsa have absorbed both the cries of suffering and the songs of devotion. Empires rose and fell, yet the call to prayer still rises from its minaret, and the echo of ancient psalms still trembles in the wind. Here, time does not erase faith. It deepens it. The paradox of holiness. The paradox of Al-Aqsa is that it belongs to everyone and therefore to no one alone. It is a sanctuary claimed by three faiths that all descend from one story, the story of a single creator, a single breath of life, and a covenant of compassion. But somewhere along the journey, our shared reverence turned into rivalry. What was meant to unite became the battleground of memory and fear. The stones that should have symbolized eternity instead became evidence in the court of human pride. And yet, when the crowds have gone and the night settles over Jerusalem, the compound returns to silence, pure, sacred silence. And in that silence, the truth remains unchanged. The divine never chose sides. The divine chose hearts beyond walls and flags. The world often looks at Al-Aqsa and sees conflict, soldiers, barricades, protests. But those who have walked its courtyards in the early morning know another face, the sound of doves, the golden shimmer of sunlight, the soft hum of prayers rising from 1,000 lips. Beneath the noise of politics lives a rhythm that no government can legislate. The rhythm of faith. The challenge for humanity is to rise above the illusion that holiness can be owned. A temple, a mosque, a church. These are doors, not destinations. They lead to the same horizon. When we defend only the door, we forget the sky it opens to, the message for the modern world. The story of Al-Aqsa is not just about Jerusalem, it is about us. about how humanity treats what it calls sacred. The way we guard this place reveals the kind of civilization we are building, one driven by possession or one guided by reverence. In a world fractured by ideology, Al-Aqsa calls us to remember that spiritual greatness begins with humility. That we cannot find peace in the heavens while waging war on earth. That faith without compassion is only sound, and that holiness without justice is only stone, the eternal echo. Perhaps that is why the universe continues to draw our eyes to Jerusalem, because in that single hilltop lies the greatest paradox of human existence, how the most sacred place on earth can also be the most divided. It is a mirror, showing us not only what we believe, but what we have become. And yet hope remains. As long as there are hearts willing to pray for peace, as long as there are hands that rebuild instead of destroy, and voices that speak truth instead of hatred, Al-Aqsa will stand, not just as a mosque, but as a message that faith can survive empire, that light can endure darkness, and that even in a city divided by walls, the human spirit still seeks the same horizon, the one where heaven and earth meet in mercy. The stones of Al-Aqsa have witnessed our worst divisions spew. They still wait for our greatest unity.